What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock, what's going on with SPY in the QQQ, what data just came out that's very important for the markets, and why don't you have to watch these levels very carefully. I'm going to break down what the technicals are telling us about the pre-market and what's going on with the news affecting Tesla, and all this information. But before I break anything down like this, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I am not a financial planner. Take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. And lastly, don't forget about the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed up to 5 free stocks and also a $100 cash reward with other benefits. The offer ends in just a couple of weeks. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, guys, so now let's talk about the markets. What on earth is going on? Looking at SPY, it's a tiny bit green in the pre-market, but it's not looking very, very strong still. And the bigger trend is still favoring the bears a bit more. However, on the smaller time frames, we're starting to see the MACD curl a little bit on the 1 hour time frame, especially after the initial jobless claims report came out. And there's a good chance it might get a pretty decent open and make an attempt to push to the upside into open, but the bigger trend is still favoring the bears, so I would still be very careful with this. But now let's break down what the data is telling us for the markets moving forward. Looking at this, initial jobless claims came out much higher than expected. The market got a very positive reaction to this. So we had 261,000 instead of the forecast of 235,000, much higher than expected. And this is technically some good news, because for the first time in a long time, we're starting to show some signs of major weakness in this economy. The jobs market is starting to take a big hit. This is exactly what the Fed and Jerome Powell wanted. Why? Because the Fed wants, and I know they don't want to admit this, but the Fed wants more unemployment. The Fed wants pain in the job sector because you have to bring down aggregate demand to slow down inflation, and the Fed is monitoring all this data very carefully. The Fed also is going to be looking at this data before making their rate hike decision. And if the Fed is seeing all these signals that inflation, whether inflation is up or not, but if it's simultaneously associated with higher unemployment, this de-incentivizes the Fed to be more hawkish. This increases the odds of a Fed pause, and the market is liking this so far. Jobless claims for the 4-week average are once again a little bit higher than expected. Continuing jobless claims are very, very close to expectations, but overall, this data is still showing weakness for the job sector, and the market likes it. Now, for earnings, let me just remind you guys, we have DocuSign after the market closes, just a couple of others, nothing way too significant today. But for Friday, I'm going to be watching this one. NEO has earnings. And just as a reminder, today is the last day, the last close before NEO reports its earnings. So once again, if NEO starts to pump and you're making profits, it's not a bad idea to take some profit and then leave maybe some positions for the next day. Not financial advice, but if you are going to do this, don't forget to hedge and manage risks. Don't go all in on one company just because it has some good looking technicals. You have to be very careful, but there is a high probability of NEO making a good move, in my opinion, based off the very, very nice looking setup and a bunch of bullish signals. However, technicals alone are not everything. It just gives us a high probability of a good move. Now, when it comes to the data, I just mentioned these things are looking okay. Don't forget about the data for tomorrow. It's going to be important too. We're still looking for wholesale inventories at about 10 o'clock a.m. So there could be a little bit more volatility at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. Don't forget about that. The market is extremely greedy, which means you should be very careful at these levels. And you got to watch support very carefully, especially in a market like this. The news is coming out and saying that, the market hasn't really changed too much. The rally has paused a bit, but we'll have to keep seeing how this goes. Now, some good news for Tesla came out. Tesla's considering building a 4.5 billion euro car factory in Spain. And this was just after the Indian news that came out. Tesla approached many Indian officials and told them that they want them to imagine and come up with a plan for how they're going to deal with Tesla and its supply chains in India. So that was some good news that came out yesterday. And now we're seeing something else that's pretty interesting. And that is the fact that they're considering to build another factory in Spain. And if they do this, that's going to be bullish news if there is some kind of announcement. But for now, there's nothing confirmed. It's just a consideration, and we'll have to see how it moves from there. Now, there's some more talk about, NVIDIA and how Tesla shares are being pricier than them, looking at some data. Honestly, guys, I'm not too worried about comparing it to NVIDIA. If anything, I still think the PE ratio of these different companies tells us a lot about them. Tesla's is a lot higher because Tesla has a tendency of being some people say it's overvalued. I wouldn't use the word overvalued. I would say that it's highly valued. And that's because of how future and forward looking the markets are. So I don't consider this bad news in a way. Uh, don't worry too much about these types of articles saying that Tesla's overvalued. In my opinion, it has a lot of potential to run anyways. But now let's talk about these technicals very briefly. What on earth is going on? All right, guys. So looking at the markets, okay, when it comes to the way that we are moving, it's very important for us to consider the current support and resistance trends. Now, SPY is pushing a little bit more because I told you guys in the 1 hour we're about to get this bullish cross. It's going to make an attempt to push up, but you have to watch resistance. 427.5 is going to be resistance. If that breaks 428, then 428.5, followed by 429, and then the high we made at 429.62, and then 430. 430 is major resistance. Now, not saying we're going to go that high because we first have to touch 427.5. And then if we break down, don't forget to be watching 426.5 as some support, but the stronger support is going to be closer to about the 426 flat area. So watch those levels very carefully. Yes, we are getting a tiny little bounce thanks to initial jobless claims. We might see the market make an attempt to push up into the open on the smaller time frames, like the hourly. Also on the 30 minutes, it's starting to flip. I think even more. The 30 minute is a little bit more in favor of the bulls, but be careful because we are testing the 50 EMA on the 30-minute time frame around this 427 zone. So 427 is going to be acting as resistance. However, when you look at the bigger time frames, the 4 hour, it's looking kind of weak still because this trend is still favoring the bears. The RSI is declining a bit, and the MACD right over here after getting this bearish cross on the PPO has not been able to flip to the upside. So we need a lot of upside for this to flip, but for now, momentum is still favoring the bears a little bit more. What does this tell me? This tells me for the short term, the market may make an attempt to bounce and like hold up for quite a while. But for the more medium term, going into like the next few hours moving forward, the next couple of trading days, there's a high probability this thing may continue to just lag a bit, trade sideways, and eventually retest 426. And there's a high probability it might actually break below that later on as it's continuing to make these lower highs. Now, we could invalidate this signal if we get a big push up and it starts to cross on the 4 hour. But for now, we're not really getting that. I mean, it's not really pushing too high. It's only up like 0.12%. So, like I said, I'm going to be watching support at 426. If 426 breaks, that's your very important pivot point. It broke below it temporarily, but bounced right back off of it again in the pre-market. It's trying to hold 426. They're fighting very hard to hold it. If that breaks on us, this thing is going to come tumbling down to 424, then finally all the way down to the lower 420s. There's 423, which is where the 50 is on the 4 hour time frame. It's going to drop a lot if 426 breaks in a strong manner, not like a little baby touch like that, a very strong break. So watch this all very carefully. Don't forget about these trends and just know that the bigger trend is favoring the bears. Okay, looking at the 4 hour, there's a higher probability of it breaking below 426. The smaller trend for the time being is favoring a small balance in the open and the market trying to hold above 426 and retest like the 427s. That's what the smaller trend is telling us. So just be careful and watch these levels carefully. For Tesla is now green in the pre-market. That's awesome to see. But I'd be careful with Tesla. We have quite a bit of resistance at this 225 level. And also the QQQ is trying to bounce a little bit. So we could see Tesla make an attempt to push up in the pre-market, but I'd be very careful. I think it's just going to remain very choppy for the time being. And it could even see a little bit of downside because on the bigger trend, it still is a little bit more bearish on the PPO. There's no confirmation of it getting a true bounce from there just yet. So we need to wait for confirmation on Tesla. However, on the smaller time frames, Tesla is making an attempt to bounce right here. The PPO is getting very tight right now, and we're getting some bullish momentum after this bounce in the pre-market off these lower levels. Now, I called out this 221 area yesterday. It came to 222 in the pre-market, so it did come down very close to the level I said. Now it's trying to bounce just a tiny bit. We're going to be watching this in a very tight range. Tesla is now just fighting around the 225s, going back and forth in this chop zone. If it's really bullish, you're going to be watching 227, 228.85, 230 after that, because that's where we have heavy resistance. If we come down more, we're going to be watching 222.74 to 223. If that breaks, then you're going to be watching 221.6, that's 221, then 220. And if that fails us, it's going to come all the way down to 218 and even lower than that to 217. So watch all of these levels. Now, there's a good chance Tesla might try to pop a little bit into the open and like hold these higher ranges. But looking at the QQQ, It's still not looking extremely strong. I mean, it's about to get a bullish cross on the PPO, so it's going to try to hold these levels and fight for 350. But if the QQQ rejects, it's going to come all the way back down to where the 200 is. The QQQ is sandwiched on the 1 hour time frame between the 50 and the 200. The QQQ could pump a little bit more and help Tesla pump, but it's going to fight some resistance right here at this 351.97 level. There's a good chance it might test it here and then get this rejection. And support that's holding this thing up is 347. So it's just sandwiched between them. If one of them breaks, that's going to dictate a bigger move. The odds favor it just being stuck here and going back and forth. And eventually later on, I'm leaning towards the QQQ breaking below the 200, the 347 area, and eventually getting into the lower 340s later on. Not saying today, it may take a couple of days, it could take another week, but I do believe there's more downside to come for the QQQ. It's looking quite weak on the 4 hour. There's no confirmation of it getting a strong bounce yet on the 4 hour. That's why I'm telling you that maybe it bounces just a tiny bit for the short term, but for the medium term, going into the next couple of trading days, going into next week, there's a higher probability of the QQQ seeing more downside into the lower 340s, 340 flat or something like that. Now, for Tesla, what does that mean? That tells me that yes, Tesla could try to hold these levels for the time being, but the QQQ slowing down may drag Tesla down a little bit more later on as well. But for now, I'm not going to worry too much about the next couple of days. We're just going to talk about right now. Tesla's very, very choppy right now. It's just going between 227 and about 222, just going back and forth and back and forth. Uh, I think for the short term, for open, we might see Tesla try to bounce a little bit and just trade range trade for now. Maybe try to push up just a tiny bit thanks to the QQQ, push up a little bit into like the somewhat higher, like 220s, just a tiny bit. But then we might see Tesla continue to slow down as the day goes on, trade very sideways. And over the next couple of days, especially with the QQQ potentially selling off more, this may cause Tesla to drop even more and make its way down to the levels I mentioned yesterday. Yesterday, I told you guys 221 was likely going to come for Tesla. If that broke, we could go lower. We came very close down the pre-market, and there's a good chance it's going to eventually get tested again, and then it's going to make its way down to about this 217 area. The odds heavily favor that, right? But we got to watch confirmation for the 50 EMA as support. I think this is eventually going to break down too later on. It's very hard to tell the timing because once again, the bigger time frame is looking a little weaker on Tesla. The smaller time frame looks like it's going to try to hold these levels. But later on, there's a high probability it's going to break this 50 EMA in the future. And then we're going to see it start testing these lower levels. Now, that's just a temporary thing. I'm not saying it's going to last forever, just temporarily. And eventually, Tesla could get a big bounce in the future. We're talking about like the next month or so. I'm not saying that this drop is going to be like, a crash or anything like that. I'm talking about a very healthy pullback. So please don't misinterpret that. All right. So, anyways, thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate every single one of you. For now, watch all the levels I was talking about in the QQQs. And let me just also note that NEO is looking pretty good. It's up 1.61% as of right now, trying to hold up. It was very tight and starting to make a bigger move. We're going to be watching this to see if it could break above $8. And there's a high probability NEO will eventually get a break to the upside. Now, is it a guarantee? No, it's not a guarantee, but it is a possibility, and there's a strong chance looking at this inverse head and shoulders, bullish divergence developed, the cup and handle formation, and the fact that NEO is making higher highs and higher lows and trending to the upside. So I'm going to be watching 8.19 at the 200 EMA. If it breaks that, it could continue to fly. Overall, it looks quite nice, and I really like the setup. The dollar is a little bit red, which is helping the market to some degree. Apple, it's very flat. Watch 178 on Apple. If it breaks 178, we could get to 180. And we're going to be watching support at 177.73, which is where the 50 EMA is. If that breaks, watch 176.87. If that breaks, 175. If Apple starts to break down, it's starting to slow down right now. If it does break down in a hard manner, that is going to slow down the markets. The 4 hour is still favoring the bears. So just be very careful in this market, okay, guys? As for SPY, it's only up 0.09%. It's still very flat, okay? So just watch support and resistance. Just know SPY is stronger than the QQQ overall. And we're going to be watching this support very carefully. If SPY breaks 426 and this thing gets this like rug pull after that, a strong break below 426, if that does come, whether it's like, today or if it takes a couple of trading days, however long it takes, if it doesn't happen until next week, who knows? But if we get this break, the odds favorite eventually happening in the future. If it comes, expect downside. Okay? Downside, this is going to slow down Tesla. It's going to slow down the QQQ. Be very careful with this. This is going to affect the whole market. But once again, this is just a short-term move, okay? talking about the next few weeks, next few days, that's short term. The longer term future of this market is still very bright alongside Tesla. I'm still very bullish on Tesla long term. I just wanted to give you guys this update. Thank you all so much for listening. Watch your levels very carefully. Do what you have to do, remain calm, cool, and collected, and I'll see you guys later on for an intraday update. Tesla to the moon alongside the whole market, and peace out.